As soon as you cross the River Tamar from Devon, you notice the distinctive environment and culture that is the county, duchy and ancient Celtic land of Cornwall. We are welcomed by Rod Lyon, Grand Bard of Cornwall.
Daith da, Dinnerch Mir the Gurno. Good day, a great welcome to Cornwall.
And that was in the Cornish language. What is the Cornish language?
Well, the Cornish language is the ancient British language. At one time, before the Anglo-Saxons arrived in the country, the one language then, of course, was the British language. And as the Anglo-Saxons pushed the British across Britain, they divided. One part going to Wales, and that became the Welsh language, and the other part came down to, well, Devon and Cornwall then, and that became the Cornish language. And a few who were pushed further afield went to Brittany. And of course, so you have the three languages very much the same. That's the Breton, the Cornish and the Welsh. So that's where the Cornish really originated.
It'd be interesting to learn some Cornish phrases. Perhaps you could give us some.
Yes, I can give you some simple ones. You've already heard Daith da, good day. Then there's Mitten da, good morning. Gorthuar da, good evening. Nos da, good night. And if you want to be nice and polite when somebody's just given you something, you can say Miraise. Thank you.
So that's thank you again?
Miraise. If you want it officially and nice and long, it's Miras Thui. But simply shortened, like we say in English, thank you, or you say thanks. So that's the two equivalents, really.
So we'll go through those. Good morning.
Good morning, Mitten da. Good day, Daith da. Good evening, Gorthuar da. Good night, Nos da. And thanks, Miraise. And of course, thank you very much, Miras Thui.
And of course, we've got a special phrase for Cornwall.
Cerno bis Viken, Cornwall forever.
Cerno bis Viken.
Cerno bis Viken with a V. Cerno bis Viken.
Cerno bis Viken. Okay.
That's it.
Come to Cornwall and you see the flag, the white cross and the black on the black background. What is that?
Well, that's originally St. Piran's flag. It's the flag of Cornwall. St. Piran believed to be an Irish saint, possibly St. Kieran in the first place. And legend has it that he upset the king of the time of Ireland, was cast into the sea with a millstone around his neck. But instead of the millstone sinking, it floated, and he floated to Perranporth on the north coast of Cornwall. And in thanks for his life being saved, he set up an oratory there, and built a little church. In fact, the church is still there as the oldest British church in existence. St. Piran himself is the patron saint of tinners, because it's alleged that he discovered how you could smelt tin and get the proper tin out of the rock. Hence the significance of the flag, the white tin from the black ground. That's the idea of the white cross, the background.
Welcome all, welcome, on this day dedicated to Piran, our patron, who in ancient times walked these towers, seeking to enrich the lives of Cornish men and women, and who today leads us ever on in hope and faith.
This is the annual pilgrimage in honour of St. Piran. It takes place every year, and along the way the play about the legend of St. Piran is performed. The legend says St. Piran arrived from Ireland in the 6th century on the beach here at Perranporth, and his oratory is here in the sand dunes, so we use the site of the oratory for the play.
St. Piran, St. Petroc, St. Agnes, St.Ives, Cornwall is truly the land of saints, most originating in the 9th century. Why is this? I asked Bill Ind, Bishop of Truro.
Well, there are, I think I'm right in saying, 80 different saints that are known only from Cornwall. And whether these saints are what we would call saints in the sense that everyone means it, I'm not sure. Certainly, people like St. Piran and St. Petroc were saints in the classical sense of that word. But I think that it would be true to say that many of the people called saints are actually the leaders of communities in different bits of Cornwall. In other words, if you can imagine lots of little, in inverted commas, kingdoms in Cornwall, where this particular person or these people were the leaders, and I think we got those things confused. What you're told, of course, is not to preach too often about the Cornish saints, because very little is known about many of them. There are lots of in inverted commas legends, which are beautiful. But of course, one of the problems is that we don't even know sometimes whether the saint is male or female.
Do these communities have a bearing on modern life in Cornwall?
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. What is certain is that there is a real sense of belonging to a community. Of course, they have feast days here in Cornwall, and a saint like St. Just, they will have their feast day, and they will the pub will be open all day, and there'll be special services in church and so on. And lots of our communities have that sort of celebration. And you see, I think that as we become more global in our understanding of the world, so we're also becoming more local. I mean, it's the same coin, if you like. It's the other side of a coin. As the world becomes our kind of oyster, so where is home becomes more and more important, not less important. And so that lots of ancient customs are being revived if they've died out, or indeed perhaps even being invented. I don't know. But it does seem to me that the building up of community is part of what we should be doing. It's certainly part of what I see as my job.
Friendly fighting between the parishes does a lot to bind communities. The traditional sport of hurling is still practised, a cross-country game of football where an entire village may make up a team, and the goals are miles apart. Richard Cour described the sport in 1602.
A play verily both rough and rude, in some sorts resembling the feats of war.
Then there's also Cornish wrestling.
It's Cornwall's national sport, very ancient. We can trace it back to 1826 BC through the ancient Book of Leinster, and it's a traditional Celtic sport. They used to practice it for warfare and the likes. All throws are made from a standing position, and you take hold of a loose-fitting sailcloth or canvas jacket that your opponent wears.
I was going to ask you, you're wearing a special costume?
Yes, this is traditional, loose-fitting and baggy, because you can wrap it up and use it in various ways to lock the arms up. 2 ropes in the front that you can catch hold of and run off for throws such as a flying mare. And there's no grabbing a man below the waist. It's all leg work on his legs and all arms on the upper body.
And you've got some special judges?
Yeah, 3 sticklers. Everybody around the world knows the term a stickler for judgment or a stickler for time, and it comes from the sport of Cornish wrestling. The 3 umpires or referees carry sticks. In the olden days, when there's a lot of money involved, they used to use them for crowd control. They were usually the landed gentry, and sometimes they would have swords in their sticks.
The traditions of Cornish life are recorded in many museums. The oldest still privately owned is the Wayside Folk Museum in Zena. Bob Priddle.
The museum houses about 5,000 to 5,500 different artefacts that really cover every aspect of Cornish life, whether that be tin mining or agriculture or the wheelwright shop, or there's an archaeology section, there's a schoolroom. People have a look around the miller's kitchen, which is in the miller's house, which dates from about 1550. So really it sort of covers all aspects from domestic to industry to agriculture. It's a very wide-ranging museum.
Have you got particular favourites?
My favourite from a male perspective would be the tin mining section. We've got some very, very unusual and rather nice artefacts in that. One that came about 2 years ago is a kibble, and a kibble is an egg-shaped bucket in which they would recover, they'd actually lift the ore from mines, and we have a very nice example in the garden. It's a very interesting piece and very Cornish. This is exactly about Cornish life. It really is typical of Cornish life, really from about 2,500 BC up to about the 1930s. Everything really is at the Wayside Museum.
And what of the Cornwall of today? I asked Bernard Deacon, a political commentator and lecturer at the Institute of Cornish Studies.
Since the 1970s, Cornish identity has strengthened. So this takes on a number of forms. There's the Cornish language, there's the flying of the St. Piran's flag, and it's a general feeling of greater confidence culturally in terms of Cornishness.
Cornwall has its own political party, and that's been relatively successful over the past 50 years or so.
Well, it's been successful and unsuccessful. It's not broken through in parliamentary elections, unlike in Plaid Cymru in Wales, for example, or the SNP in Scotland. So in that sense, if you look at Cornwall as a sort of Celtic country like Scotland and Wales, you've got to say MK is not very successful, because the highest vote in parliamentary elections has been about 2-point-something%.
MK being?
MK being maybe in Kernow. But in local elections, it's been successful in the sense that local councillors have been elected, and the average vote that MK gets at local elections is about 10-12%, and compares well with fourth parties anywhere else. And also, interestingly, compares very well with Brittany and Breton autonomist movements and parties.
There have been in the past sort of direct action where people have ripped up English signs and replaced them with Cornish. Presumably that's just a publicity stunt.
Well, I think that's more than publicity. I think that comes from genuine feelings. And the most spectacular one of recent years has been campaigning against English heritage, because Cornish heritage sites were, as is seen in some quarters, commandeered by English heritage, and suddenly became English sites, which actually date from before the English set foot in the British Isles. So that did give rise to a lot of resentment, and I think a certain level of popular support for what they did then, they oxyacetylene signs and stored them, until the argument was they would keep the signs until English Heritage agreed to change the name to Cornish Heritage.
More and more people presumably are speaking Cornish.
I think there's an increase in Cornish speaking. The numbers are very small. Probably about 250, 300 of us can speak Cornish in a sort of everyday way. However, the Cornish language, what strikes me is its visibility now. You now see Cornish. Only yesterday I was picking up my daughter from school, and coming back home we saw a washing machine repair company, which is bilingual Cornish and English on the van. We were behind the Cornwall County Council van, which had one and all, which means one and all in Cornish on the back of their van. We went past the Welcome to Reduce signs, which are also bilingual and in Cornish, Welcome to Reduce in Cornish as well. So 3 instances just in an 8-mile journey where we saw the Cornish language.
So there's a much more visible pride in being Cornish.
I think that is a symbol of that deeper pride in being Cornish, yeah.
Does the next generation feel a pride in their nationality? I popped along to ask the sixth formers at Truro College. Are you Cornish?
Yeah.
Does it mean anything?
Not really, no.
You're as much English as Cornish?
Yeah.
Does it mean anything to you being Cornish?
Yeah, quite a bit really. Like being sort of local, like in a way.
And sports, things like that?
Sort of playing for down here means a lot more than playing up country, I reckon.
So as a sporting identity, it's quite strong.
Oh yeah, quite a bit, yeah. I would say so, definitely.
I like being Cornish because I do. I don't know why. I just like it. It's just different. Everyone always has like these opinions about Cornish people, and usually they're wrong. They usually just think we're really stupid and that all we do is drive tractors around on fields, which is blatantly untrue.
I wasn't actually born in Cornwall. I was born up in London, but I've been living there 13 years. So I feel Cornish. Yeah, it's cool.
From the picturesque estuaries of the south coast over granite moorlands to the wide beaches and dramatic cliffs of the north, Cornwall has many moods. There are ancient and spiritual places as well as modern working landscapes.
Take Bravo is approaching the coast, 7500 Charlie next.
Golf Papa Kilo ready for departure.
Golf Papa Bravo traffic opposite direction, company S61 just airborne, 1500 feet southern route.
Just taken off, I'm climbing up, we'll be turning slightly to the left and you can see Sennan Beach and village down there. If we continue a bit further, you see the cove coming round. Tucked in there is the wreck of the Mulheim. The little coaster that went in, carrying plastic waste. Yeah, and then the bit that sticks out on the right. And then we can follow the coast down. This part of the coast is often where we see dolphins, basking sharks.
Copy that, Echo Bravo.
Take a scenic flight from Land's End and you get a unique view of the Cornish landscape. And it's a particularly ancient one, so says Peter Herring, an archaeologist working for Cornwall County Council.
Although it's still being farmed today, the fields that the farmers are using, we think from our surveys, are between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. The farmers are still working inside fields that were laid out by Bronze Age and Iron Age people and were then used by medieval and more recent farmers. It is the oldest working landscape in Europe, I'll be sure of that.
Are property boundaries equally as old?
Yes, I think so, because the boundaries between the farms are the streams, natural features, and they create long ribbons through the West Penwith landscape, going down from the high moors, the downs, across the nice level plateaus where there's the main farming land, the arable land, and then down to the cliffs, so that each farm has a relatively equal amount of rough ground for grazing, arable land for the main crops, and then rough ground and coastal access for fishing and to wreck and so on.
Is there any evidence that the people living there can trace their ancestry back literally thousands of years?
No, I think they can quite often trace back to the medieval period, say 600 or 700 years. But we can see from the pattern of the fields and the pattern of land use that they've inherited and reused the earlier people's properties. But it's not impossible that if we were to find, which you won't because of the acid soils, but if we were to find bones of Iron Age people, that the DNA would be similar to that of some of the people still farming the land. I think it's a reasonable guess.
And of course Penwith itself has got some remarkable archaeological remains.
Yes, but because it's a granite landscape, the monuments that were built 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, 5,000 in some cases, do survive well. And the other reason they survive is that, again, because it's granite, it's a marginal landscape, so more recent farmers haven't damaged it. And we have on the Downs in particular some very well preserved monuments. These include the quoits, the Neolithic portal dolmens, which would have been territory markers and significant monuments in the early landscape. And then we have stone circles from the Bronze Age and standing stones, large pieces of granite up to 4 or 5 metres high in some cases. And then right through to later prehistoric settlements and fields, which survive beyond the tide mark of more recent farmers on the high downs. And these include settlements like Chisorster, which is a very well preserved Iron Age and Romano-British settlement with beautiful courtyard houses, so people can go there today and go through the doorways and enter the rooms of prehistoric homes.
The landscape has a spiritual intensity, especially in the mysterious fugus.
In some of these settlements, like at Chisorster and at Carnuni, and we have fugus, which are artificial caves. They were created by digging a long trench, building walls along the sides, and then putting capstones on, and then giving these trenches a twist so that as you entered, you couldn't see the far end, and it's probably at that far end that rituals may have taken place. We think of these as multi-purpose features. They could have been used for storage or for refuge, but they could also have been the place where people went to perform rituals.
They're quite sort of spooky places, really.
They are to us today, and they probably were to the people then. I think it was part of the design that you're leaving the mundane world and going into under the ground and into a strange and dark place.
Sticking with the sort of spirituality, I suppose, of the landscape, the tours on the landscape must have also resulted in many sort of religious beliefs.
Yes, the tors, which are these massive rock piles, usually very dramatic, like Roach Rock or Routor or the Cheese Ring, do seem to have been important to prehistoric people in the same way that they're still landmarks and important to us today. At some of these tors, the meanings continued after the prehistoric period through to the medieval period. For instance, at Roach Rock and again at Routor, you have chapels built on the rocks, celebrating the rocks. The Roach Rock Chapel survives in good condition today and is a spectacular monument.
We've talked about tours being of religious significance. There are also pits that have gained certain religious significance as well.
That's right. Much more recent, of course. In the last 200 or 300 years, the Methodists have also had outdoor preaching places in pits. These are not natural pits. They're old shafts, mine shafts, which have been adapted by having tiers of benches cut into their sides to create amphitheatres for Methodist gatherings. And John Wesley famously spoke to hundreds or even thousands at Gwenup Pit near Redruth in West Cornwall.
There's quite a Methodist tradition within Cornwall.
Cornwall's very important for its Methodism, even today, but it was especially important in the 18th and 19th centuries.
The rocks that built Cornwall's landscape were at one time contorted as the massive plates which make up the Earth's crust collided to form ancient mountains. Rocks melted and then crystallised into the granites of Dartmoor, Exmoor and Bodmin. These prehistoric convulsions were so violent that fragments of mantle were torn up from the planet's innards. The reptilian colours of this alien presence on the Earth's surface are preserved at the Lizard as serpentinite, a rock now worked by craftsmen such as John Hendy.
That is the point. That's what we use for actually roughing this rough stuff down. And then when we've done that, we've got the flat for fining up. So we'll rough this one down a minute.
Quite easily.
Oh yes, especially this particular piece here. This one is exceptionally soft, but it varies quite a bit in hardness. I'll just rough down a bit more of it. See, that's the roughing down bit. Seeing we haven't got all day, I'll smooth a little piece up for you.
Wonderful. That's excellent.
There we are. Now, when the argile is actually made, I shall use 2 or 3 different grades of wet and dry on it to bring it up to a fine surface.
And it comes to us quite a high polish at the end.
Oh yeah, well that's done with Jeweller's Rouge and olive oil on an old chamois leather, or a nice piece of corduroy trousers will do.
So what are these things? So we've got various colours.
Yeah, well as you can see, there's about 10 different articles here. And every one of them is different colour. Some of them are green, some of them are grey. This particular one here is a very light one with grey and red in it. So the beauty of Serpentine, every piece is different. You won't find 2 the same.
And they're making into various objects?
Yeah, these are going to be vases, but I also make lighthouses, lamps, handles for knives, paperweights, barometers, pen stands, and quite a few other things.
Slate was another product of these ancient earth movements and were exploited at Carnglaze Caverns, as Caroline Richards explains. You come in and it's like a natural cathedral.
Yes, 3 huge caverns left behind by centuries of slate mining in the area. The first cavern is called the Rum Store. It was used in the Second World War by the Navy for storing the rum from Devonport in Plymouth, of course. Now we use it as a concert hall, and the acoustics are fantastic in that cavern, and it particularly suits classical music and acoustic music of all sorts, male voice choirs and so on, and a very atmospheric space as well. Right, well, we're currently in the third chamber. The floor of the third chamber takes you right down to just above river level, and it's now flooded. It's full of a most beautiful turquoise-coloured lake that's 30 feet deep.
It is absolutely beautiful. And of course, when you have visitors here, you keep it dark and then you switch on the light.
We do indeed, yes. We get them to come and stand by the little wall here and then put the light on for them, and you get lots of gasps and wow sounds. We're licensed for weddings, and people can get married in the rum store chamber or indeed down where we are at the moment as well.
The moors were even wilder than she had at first supposed. Like an immense desert, they rolled from the east to the west, with tracks here and there across the surface, and great hills breaking the skyline. Black cattle grazed on the moors beneath, their careful feet treading the firm ground, and with inborn knowledge they avoided the tufted, tempting grass that was not grass at all, but soggy marsh that sighed and whispered. When the wind blew on the hills, it whistled mournfully in the crevices of granite, and sometimes it shuddered like a man in pain. Strange winds blew from nowhere. They crept along the surface of the grass, and the grass shivered. They breathed upon the little pools of rain in the hollowed stones, and the pools rippled. Sometimes the wind shouted and cried, and the cry echoed in the crevices and moaned, and was lost again. There was a silence on the tors that belonged to another age, an age that is past and vanished, as though it had never been, an age when man did not exist, but pagan footsteps trod upon the hills. And there was a stillness in the air, and a stranger, older peace, that was not the peace of God.
An extract from Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier describing Bodmin Moor, read by Carol Chaporian. The area has a special quality. Dominic Fairman of South Penquite Farm.
The thing about Bodmin Moor is its unique quality is its timelessness. When you're out on the commons, out in the middle of the moor, and you're surrounded by many Bronze Age settlements and sacred sites and medieval field patterns, and all still very much in place. It gives you a great sense of what it was like, several hundred years ago, even possibly thousands of years ago.
And there are many famous landmarks, the tors and such like, and also the bogs, they can be quite dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. It is a bit, you've got to be a bit cautious out there if you don't know the area. Some of the bogs are a bit dangerous, and the tors are obviously very prominent. The rocky tors of Router and Brown Willie are very prominent in the landscape.
A lot of the farming methods here are quite unchanged.
Yes, the rights to use the common, which are our common rights, the right to graze the commons, go back to medieval times and are unchanged as they are today. So on our deeds are our rights to graze so many head of cattle and so many sheep on the commons, and that still remains very much so today. The pony culture on Bodmin Moor is still fairly strong. It's still the best way of rounding up your sheep is on horseback.
One conspicuous but very modern feature of the landscape are wind farms. Peter Edwards of Wind Electric in Delabole. Is Cornwall particularly well suited to wind farms?
Cornwall is, yes. The United Kingdom has 40% of the wind resource for all of Europe, and the wind here in Cornwall is quite high. It's uninterrupted for 3,000 miles from America, and it does produce a lot of energy.
This is the oldest wind farm in Cornwall. How did it come about?
It's the first wind farm in the country, actually. It came about because in the early 80s they wanted to put a nuclear power station in Cornwall. My wife wasn't very keen on the idea and was protesting against it, so I think the discussions went, well, you need electricity, it's got to come from somewhere, and she said, well, what about wind? So I went to Denmark and found out, and here's the wind farm.
Was there a lot of local opposition? How do people Cornwall regard their wind farms now?
Everyone was very enthusiastic about it, and what's so nice, the people of Delabole refer to it as their wind farm, and they're very proud of it.
First thing you hear about wind farms is they're noisy, but they're not particularly.
I think you can listen for yourself, and there's a slight whooshing noise and a slight hum, but we are standing very close to a turbine. Most people live 350 yards and you virtually can't hear them from that distance.
But how much electricity does one of these turbines produce?
We've got 10 of them here, and these 10 over the year produce the average consumption of about 2,700 homes.
2,700 homes, what's a small town perhaps?
Well, when they're at maximum power, they're producing enough electricity for Delabole, Tintagel and Camelford, 2 small towns and a village.
Some people have criticised wind farms, saying that they're actually far less efficient than they could be, and they're actually producing far less electricity than is deserved from their impact on the landscape.
Well, they produce here, we produce about 30% of their maximum output over the year. So that's not efficiency, and really that doesn't really matter, seeing the fuel is totally free. If your car ran on water rather than petrol, would you really worry how many miles to the gallons it did?
From ancient times to modern, the Cornish landscape has been forged from the natural forces that formed it and by the people who lived from it.
Piskies, Spriggans, fairies and giants all once walked Cornwall's lands, as did King Arthur and the Knights of Camelot. Their stories are part of Britain's ancient oral tradition.
It's supposed to be a place where the King Arthur came across from Tintagel and supposed to throw the sword, and one of these knights supposed to come across and throw the sword into the middle of that pool. So that is the history there, of which this knight never did it in the first place. And he had to go 3 times. When it was done the third time, the knight went back, saw King Arthur, then he died in peace and comfort. Other times that he went, King Arthur knew that he came back lying, because this knight wanted the sword himself.
Archive audio of Lanson man Bill Cole and his tales of Arthur and the return of Excalibur. Cornwall's land, Cornwall's psyche, is steeped in myth and legend. Tintagel has become a place of pilgrimage. Here's Sam Rowe of the New Age spiritual shop, The House That Jack Built. What draws people here to Tintagel?
Well, obviously the Arthurian legends, the beauty, the scenery. It's a very mystical place. Obviously there's a lot of witchcraft in the area. A lot of pagans come here. A lot of people sort of soul searching, and also people into all sorts of mysticism.
And there's growing interest in that sort of aspect of life, isn't there?
Well, there is, yeah. Obviously we're in the Aquarian age, aren't we, as well, so it's going to become more and more normal.
What's that?
The Aquarian age, things like telepathy, anything to do with the air is going to become more commonplace, basically. So telepathy, perhaps seeing spirits, spirit communication, angelic, fairy communication, all that sort of thing is going to become more normal. If you think about it, 20 years ago, I mean, even sort of in Tintagel, to have a conversation like we're having, or to even have shops with things like this in, it wasn't as commonplace. It was a little bit more sort of subversive and underground, you know.
So there's a change in attitude?
Oh, totally, yeah, I think so, yeah. We get a lot of people from all different walks of life, different social classes. It's not just sort of young people that are interested in sort of alternative ways. It's people right the way across the board, which is really good, I think.
Just down the road in Boscastle is Graham King's Museum of Witchcraft. What's the story?
There's a lovely tradition of witchcraft and mystical things in this area. But in particular, I mean, one of the nice stories about Boscastle is the stories of the witches selling the wind to sailors. And they'd go up onto the hillsides and they'd take a bit of rope with them, and they'd tie 3 knots. They'd capture the wind in 3 knots in a bit of rope and then sell the rope to the sailors. The sailors would untie a knot and the wind would come up. But, you know, I mean, in living memory, there's all sorts of charmers and healers being in the village, you know, especially I've seen wart charmers in the pubs, you know, charming people's warts. So the whole area is steeped in these lovely mystical traditions.
And what does the museum have?
Well, it's called the Museum of Witchcraft. I guess it should really be magic and witchcraft, and it covers all sorts of subjects that are connected with magic and witchcraft. So we look at all the stereotypical images of witchcraft, so the broomsticks and the cauldrons and the pointy hats. and we look at very early images and modern images. We look at the sacred sites, where we look at stone circles and labyrinths and these special places that you find here in Cornwall. We've got a tableau of a cottage set up about late 18th century, where we look at the herbs and the various potions that these wise women, or pillars as they called them here in Cornwall, would use to heal people. We look at ritual magic and the things like the Golden Dawn and some of these occult societies. We look at overlaps with Christianity and Freemasonry. So it's quite a wide subject.
St Michael's Mount is a legendary Cornish site and was home to Lord St Leven for many years. There are many legends associated with the origin of this quite magnificent building and island.
Yes, there are. Of course, there's one story that appealed to children for generations is the story of Jack the Giant Killer. That's the story of the giant who lived on St Michael's Mount, and he used to wade ashore and steal sheep and cows. And Jack was a brave little Cornish boy, because all Cornish boys were called Cousin Jack. And he went over to the mount. In the middle of the night, he dug a deep pit, a deep well, and he blew a horn next morning and during the night, and the giant rushed down the hill and fell into the well, and Jack killed him. So Jack was known as Jack the Giant Killer. And now the guides, when they take people up the hill, they show them a stone which is shaped like the heart of a giant. And they say if they put their hands on their breast, they'll hear the giant's heart beating. Well, of course, they've climbed halfway up the hill, and it always amuses the children every single time.
When Sam goes back in memory, it is to where the sea breaks on the shingle, emerald green, in white foam endlessly. He says, with small brown eye on mine, I used to keep awake and lean from my window in the moon and watching those billows break. And 500,000 tiny hands and eyes like sparks of frost would dance and come tumbling into the moon on every breaker tossed. And all across from star to star I've seen the watery sea with not a single ship in sight, just ocean there. And me, and heard my father snore. And once, as sure as I'm alive, out of those wallowing moon-flecked waves, I saw a mermaid dive. Head and shoulders above the wave, plain as I now see you, combing her hair, now back, now front, her 2 eyes peeping through, calling me, Sam, quiet like, Sam. But me, I never went, making believe I kind of thought 'twas someone else she meant. Wonderfully lovely there she sat, singing the night away, all in the solitudinous sea of that their lonely bay. P'raps, and he'd smooth his hairless mouth, p'raps, if it were now, my son, p'raps, if I heard a voice say, Sam, morning would find me gone.
Sam by Walter de la Mare, read by Stuart Turnbull. I asked about the sea connection to Harry Glasson, who, as Harry Safari, takes visitors on tours of Cornwall's ancient and historic sites.
We do have a lot of legends to do with the sea, yes, because being surrounded by the sea, you cannot get more than 2.5 miles from the sea in this area, so you're bound to have a lot of legends from the sea.
There's one in particular, the Mermaid of Zena. What was the story behind that?
Oh, there was a boy who sang in the choir down at Zena Church, and his name was Matthew Truella. And he sang so sweetly that this beautiful mermaid used to come into the back of the church every week to listen to him sing. And one Sunday he was seen walking down to the cove with her and was never seen again. And then a few years later, a ship dropped its anchor in the cove. They were anchored there for a few hours when they heard a knocking on the hull of the ship. And one of the men looked over the side and he saw this beautiful mermaid. And he asked her she asked him if he would raise his anchor because it had fallen onto the trapdoor into her home and she had to get in to get tea for Matthew and the children. And that's how they knew he's down beneath the waves with a mermaid. Well, that's more or less the story as far as I recall. I reckon he ran off with somebody else's wife and his mother put that story around.
Okay. And of course there's the legend of Lyonesse.
Yeah, the legend of Lyonesse is supposed to be a land between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly. And it was inundated by the water there, supposedly by Merlin, who, as they were carrying Arthur's dead body away to the Isles of Scilly, he stuck a staff in the ground and caused the seas to rush in and flood the land between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly. That's the legend. I mean, St. Michael's Mount, they reckon, was on the land until around 2000 BC, because here they got tree stumps there. A whole forest showed itself between St. Michael's Mount and the Battery Rocks off Penzance, and those tree stumps were carbon dated to around 2000 BC. So we know that the waters did rise at that time, so there could have well have been habitation between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly.
So perhaps many of the legends in Cornwall are related to events that happened in Cornish prehistory, actual real events that happened.
Well, I'm pretty certain that most legends are. That they have been handed down from person to person, probably for thousands of years. We have lots of legends here of giants, for instance, and piskies. Nearly every hill has a giant on it, and all the little people live down in the valleys. Now, we know that from excavations that the people who lived here were quite slight. They were probably averaging 5 feet in height and very slim, fine-boned people. But every now and then, they're excavated much bigger people, and they're usually up on top of the hills. And they were probably Vikings or Norsemen that raided around the coast, fought their way to the top of the hill, because it's the easiest place to defend yourself from. And to the little people down in the valley, these people up on the hills were giants. They were big people. And with the telling of the stories, those people got bigger.
The most famous and lasting of the Cornish legends are those of King Arthur. I joined Joe Parsons of the Arthurian Centre on the banks of the River Camel.
The King Arthur's stone here at Slaughter-Bridge is a 6th century monument to a Celtic leader. And the names on the stone are Latin names, which many of the early British people took after the Romans had left England.
And it's believed to possibly be where King Arthur had his last battle.
The site is mentioned by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was the first to really write down the stories of King Arthur. And this is the site where King Arthur was meant to have met Mordred for the final battle. Mordred was killed and Arthur was taken off to Avalon.
We think of Arthur as being a medieval king and think of shining armour and such like, but that's not the case.
No, the medieval romancers took the legends of King Arthur from the earlier years and then dressed them up in their own time, as many stories do now. So King Arthur became this chivalrous knight with his shining armour, when in fact he was a 6th century Celtic leader.
And he was leading battles against who?
Mainly in the stories against the Saxons, who were pushing in from what is now Germany and Belgium area. They were pushing in from the east, and somebody in the southwest, we know, did keep them back. So the stories grew up about the leader of men, who was presumably Arthur.
Many areas of Britain claim Arthur for themselves, but Cornwall has a special claim.
Cornwall is where the first stories put King Arthur. This is his homeland. He did travel around the whole of Britain, fighting battles against various people trying to invade Britain. But this is the homeland, and the early stories put everything down here, the birth and the final battle. And it's interesting that those stories were then taken to Brittany in the 7th and 8th century. As the Saxons finally did push into the southwest, many Cornish families moved to Brittany. And Brittany means Little Britain. Western Brittany is Cornwall, which is Cornwall, and the Breton language is much the same as the Cornish language.
So the Cornish refugees, I suppose, took their Arthurian legends to Brittany?
They did, and one theory again is that then the Breton knights, which were Cornish families, came back in 1066. So in fact the invasion of Britain in 1066 was the Bretons helping the Normans to retake Britain from the Saxons.
More liberation than invasion.
That's the theory, and I think it's got a lot of weight to it. And also, the knights were given lands all over Britain when they'd helped William, and it could be that the stories travelled around the whole of Britain then as well.
Perhaps a bit of propaganda.
Possibly, but if people move to a different part of the country or the world, they tend to take their stories, and then landmarks become part of the story as well. So you find King Arthur all over Britain.
Where would Camelot be then?
Camelot is a bit more of a medieval invention again. Arthur would have had strongholds all over the place, one of which is Cadbury Castle in the south of England, and that would have been one of the frontier towns against the Saxons. So it could be there. It could be Tintagel Castle here in Cornwall.
And no round table, presumably that's a complete fiction.
I think the idea of knights standing in a circle discussing tactics, people do that. People do sit in a circle and discuss things around a fire, maybe. So the idea of a round table is perfectly reasonable. Maybe not on the scale that some of the stories talk about.
The myths and legends of Cornwall make beautiful stories, yet many are based on fact. They are a breathing archaeology, a living link to our most ancient past.
The rich metal deposits of Cornwall and Devon, along with the miners and engineers whose skill won them from the rocks, were a vital part of the Industrial Revolution. The region is so important, it has now been considered to be made a United Nations World Heritage Site.
This is a steam winding engine that used to lift the ore out of the shaft. It's a beam engine, about 165 years old, working on steam today.
Magnificent machine, though.
Oh yes, it was designed and built for this mine to do the job it did, which it did for 90 years until the mine closed in 1930, and then it lay locked up in this building.
And you're involved in the restoration and running of it?
Well, only in the running of it. It was actually restored before I started. So that took place about 15 years ago, the restoration.
Enjoyable work?
Yes, there was a variety of people doing it. Very few of them actual engineers and school teachers and carpenters, all sorts of characters.
The Levant mine and beam engine, now owned by the National Trust and kept running by a dedicated band of volunteers. Fire, steam, metal and engineering evoke the spirit of Cornwall's industrial past and were the essential building blocks of it. The great Cornubian ore field owes its origin to the deep subterranean heat which formed the granite which underlies the Cornish peninsula. Mineral-rich groundwater, seared to superheated steam, punched through cracks and fissures in the bedrock, and as it rose and cooled, deposited metal ores, lead, gold, arsenic, and, most importantly, copper and tin.
Without those metals, and without them easily available, the British Industrial Revolution would not have been so successful. Without the engineers who worked in the industry, the great steam engineers, Britain would not have led the world in technology and engineering, as of course it did for 150 years. And so Cornwall, and in fact this particular part of Cornwall, where we are now in Poole, was the NASA of the late 18th, early 19th century, because here is where all the great inventors either were born or lived or brought up or came from abroad to work. So, this country area of Cornwall was at one time extremely important. Because our mines were deep and because our pumps had to be extremely efficient, and also our other hoisting gear, it meant that they were forever advancing technology and producing ever more sophisticated and efficient and economical machinery. And they did. People like Trevithick and Wolfe and West and Gross and Lean and all of these great engineers produced engines and machines that were the envy of the world.
Cornish miners opened up mining all around the world.
Well, yes, they certainly were. In fact, in North America, I should say, even before the American Revolution, Cornishmen were going out to the Great Lakes and looking at the copper and lead there, and had already marked the areas for future development. And the British government, before the Revolution, were actually sending Cornishmen and engineers out there. Cornish engineers were erecting steam engines in America as early as the 1750s. But subsequently they went to South America. Trevithick, of course, spent many years in South America. They opened up Mexico. Eventually they opened up the North American areas in Canada and the United States. And they were the ones who discovered the gold, the tin and the other metals in Australia, New Zealand, and ultimately in South Africa. And in places like South Africa, there are even now large colonies of Cornish expats, as well as people descended from the Cornish. South Australia has more Cornish people, I should think, than Cornwall does, and certainly Wisconsin and those parts of America do also. So they, as Hamilton Jenkins once said, they taught the world to mine, and they did.
Alan Buckley, an ex-miner, now a mining historian and author of the book Mining in Cornwall. Tin and copper have been exported from Cornwall since prehistory, through the industry's zenith in the 18th and 19th centuries until the last mine closed at the end of the 20th. At its Victorian height, Cornwall was the biggest producer of copper, with just 2 parishes providing 40% of global production. Evidence of this massive activity now litters the Cornish landscape.
There's hardly a part of Cornwall, hardly a parish in Cornwall that hasn't got some remnant of what was a great industry. Some of those, what's left, really stretch back from the medieval period or even earlier, but most of it is from the 18th and 19th and early 20th century. Literally scores of great engine houses still remain. Whole areas of old mine buildings, mostly in ruins, although not all of them, are still there to be seen, from the cliffs at St. Just down towards Land's End and round on Mounts Bay, through to the great engine houses at Campbell, Madruth and Poole, all over Cornwall, from the Tamar right the way down almost to Land's End. There are evidences of this tremendous industry that employed at one time 40 to 50,000 people. A massive industry that really fed the world with copper and tin. Well, one of the spin-offs of Cornish mining were, of course, the ancillary industries, the industries that fed the industry, foundries that made the great engines like Harveys of Hale, Perham Wharf, the Cornish Copper Company, Holman's, Camborne, Tuckermill Foundry, and so on. These produced machinery that not only served Cornwall and its mines, but also were sent all over the world, but also gunpowder factories. In about 1800, Cornwall began to make their own gunpowder, and eventually we had some really enormous factories like the one at Kennel Vale, others at Trago Mills and places like that. And then there were the fuse factories. The safety fuse was invented in Cornwall at Tuckermill by a group of Methodists who got together to work out how they could make mining safer. And within a short time of patenting the invention in 1831, they had factories springing up everywhere, and they became the biggest manufacturers of safety fuse in the world. And several safety fuse factories were built by rival companies around here. So whether it's candle making, making massive steam engines, making gunpowder or safety fuse, no matter what it was, if it was to do with mining, the Cornish made it and they exported it, and they took it all over the world.
And people actually got very rich on this. The investment, the actual money that people could make could be huge.
Absolutely, yes. Ordinary Cornish miners made good money, but many of those also became entrepreneurs themselves and became adventurers or shareholders in the mines. Men like William Lemon became multi-millionaires by our standards. The Williams family, ordinary working class people in the late 17th century, became the wealthiest family in the southwest of England halfway through the 19th century by investing, developing and working hard. The Bassets went from being an ordinary little gentry family to being fabulously wealthy and entertaining kings at Tehiddy. All over Cornwall, ordinary miners advanced themselves. The more intelligent, skilled men became mine captains and managers and advanced themselves socially and economically. And some of the larger families became very, very wealthy.
Cornwall's very bedrock has also been exported for profit. Go along a street in London or other major city in the UK and see curbstones and building fascias hewn from strong Cornish granite. The granite also gave china clay. One of the few major deposits in Europe and worked since the 1740s, it's formed by a process involving groundwater and the rock's natural radioactivity. Here's David Owens, manager of the Wheel Martin China Clay Museum.
Okay, we've come to the viewing platform of Wheel Martin Pit, which is the modern pit, and you can see the huge deep hole that's been dug to extract the china clay. And the process is really quite simple, although it's much more mechanised now. The process is exactly the same as in the very early days. Over to our right you can see a hose pipe, of what we call a monitor, shooting water out at huge pressure, and this is actually washing the clay out of the rocks that have been loosened by explosives. The clay then flows down to the bottom of the pit, and you can see it goes to the lowest part of the pit, way below us. And there it's pumped through a primary processor which gets rid of the sand, and then you can see the sand heaps building up around there, and that's the waste product. And then the actual china clay slurry is piped out of the pit and is taken to the modern refineries, where it'll be settled in big tanks and dried in huge dryers, a bit like tumble dryers, until it's reduced to a dry powder. And it won't be long before the clay that we see being washed out here will be loaded into ships in either Foy or Par, and it'll travel all over the world with various industries that need it.
The china clay workings are certainly an important part of the landscape around St. Austell. And if you're in the area, it's well worth visiting the new museum buildings and walking around the now quite beautiful old workings.
Well, the museum tells the story of china clay, and more importantly tells the story of the people of the china clay. Our new exhibits, which opened in June 2005, tell the story of the communities and how they existed, how they worked, and how they played in the shadow of the clay tips. So we tell the story of the sporting competitions between the villages, the brass bands that grew up, the art of the china clay district, because it's got quite a cultural diversity. We've even got our own famous clay poet, Jack Clemo, who wrote poetry about the clays, despite the fact he was blind and deaf at the end of his life. So there's a lot to see in the clay district, and the Wheel Martin China Clay Museum is the place to start, which introduces you to the whole ethos of the area.
Another Cornish bedrock export is Delabole slate, owned and run by George and Thessaly Hamilton. Delabole slate, it's used for loads of different things.
Oh yes, it's used for various things. It's anything from monuments to worktops and flooring and roofing.
In fact, we're standing in front of a few displays. They're used in sides to produce fireplace surrounds and furniture.
Yes, that's right. We use Della stone for the fireplaces. There's flooring, there's slab flooring, riven flooring, there's tiles for walls.
It gives quite a sort of chic, contemporary look.
It certainly does. It's very desirable, especially for worktops in kitchens.
Why is it here?
It's the ideal spot. You know, all the geological minerals were in the right geological time, and Mother Nature did her bit.
And now you've got possibly one of the largest holes in Cornwall.
It's, probably one of the largest holes in Cornwall. It was one of the largest in Europe, man-made in Europe, but not anymore, I'm afraid.
What, you filled it in, or there's a bigger one?
There's a lot bigger ones now.
While slate, granite and china clay are still worked, the last tin mine closed in the 1990s. They can now be visited by tourists. Poldark Mine, named to cash in on the popular TV series, has craft displays and the chance for the children to pan for gold. Tours of the underground workings were described by the chairman of English Heritage as one of the most atmospheric mine tours in Europe. One of the county's last working mines was Givor near Pendeen, also well worth a visit. Ian Davey worked there as a miner until it closed and is now a tour guide. What was the average day in Givor?
Well, the average day for me would have been 7 o'clock in the morning going underground, and about 2:30 in the afternoon coming up, and then have a shower. So we was actually 7 till 3, but we wasn't paid by the hour. We was actually paid on a contract system, so the hours didn't really come into the equation. But that was a working day.
So you were paid about what you dug. So.
Yeah, we were actually paid on what we produced, either as a pair of miners or a collection of miners, known as a tramman contract. The machine men worked in pairs, that's for health and safety as well, and also, of course, the tramman contract was a collection of men of about 70, 80 men, and they were actually paid on the rock that was removed from the mine, rather than hand labour or whatever.
Why did it close down? Did the tin run out?
No, we thought we had a great future. I mean, the mine was actually increased in size, depth-wise, between the years of 1975 and 1980. Our mine actually went down another 600 feet in depth. We thought we had a great future, not only for us, but for our children as well, and the generations to follow. But it was actually all to do with the world tin price. The world tin price actually collapsed by about 1982, about 82, I suppose. The tin price then started to go from anywhere between £8,500 to £10,000 a tonne through the metal exchange in London. That was the world price. It actually then started to slide. By about 1984, 85, the world price then had gone down to about £3,500. That's the reason we finished.
So there's still tin down there?
Yes, there's still tin there as far as we know. Like you said, we were told by the management there was a great future for not only for us but for the company as well, but unfortunately it wasn't.
The closure of the mines had a massive impact on Cornwall. Alan Buckley again, to conclude.
The whole communities really were affected by this. And I recently gave a talk to a group of 7 or 8 year olds at Lana School, and I asked them at the beginning how many had fathers, grandfathers, uncles and cousins and so on who'd worked at the mine, and over half the class put their hand up. And I thought it was quite impressive, because these were children who were barely born when the mine closed and lived 5 miles from the mine. But it shows what an impact upon a community the closure of something like South Crofty and the other mines has had. Very, very sad. It's hard to imagine, really, for most of us around here, that nobody's actually working underground. That there's nothing going on down there. There's no activity. And it's like a part of Cornwall has been sort of ripped away and taken away. It is extremely sad.
Surrounded by fertile seas, the Cornish have always been a fishing people. The waters are still rich in life, which should support a healthy fishing industry for many generations to come.
Sailing the Foul Estuary with Les Angel aboard the Three Sisters. The oyster fishermen of Falmouth are the last in the country still to dredge under sail. Okay, well, you've thrown some dredges down. Looks like a good haul there.
Yeah, there's a lot of dead in it, and we just pick the oysters out from the dead shells. So there's some good oysters there in that. Plenty of meat in them.
Yeah.
So that'll keep them happy in London, because most of our catch goes to London.
Fair number of crabs there as well.
Yeah, you get that in nearly every dredge. Quite a few crabs that we don't take out, but a few nice oysters in it.
Oh, they're brilliant, yeah. Quite chunky.
Yeah.
Is there much competition between the different oyster fishermen?
Yeah, a little bit.
Is there?
Everybody likes to catch the most, you know.
So did they keep secret the good places?
Yeah, they try to. They do their best.
I suppose if you see half a dozen of them at one place, you know what's going on.
Well, it does let on a little bit, doesn't it? Object is not to stay in the same place too long, so they find out.
It's a good life.
Yeah, it's fresh air, innit? You aren't stuck in office. Nobody getting on to you. Please yourself when you work, when you don't.
Oysters are getting less popular or more popular?
I think they're getting more popular now. People are trying them with the cooking programs and what have you.
These farmed oysters are coming in now.
Yeah, so people are buying a lot more farmed oysters. They're that much cheaper, and that's what a lot of people are going for. They're not the quality the native oysters are.
They're just swamping the market, presumably.
Yeah. It's not done our flat oysters, which we catch, any good. They're taking our markets away because they're that much cheaper, but not the quality. Viagra in a shell.
Over the ages, Cornish fishermen and their families have faced both feast and famine. Times were sometimes harsh and uncertain, easy to forget in the picturesque fishing ports we see today.
A merry place you may believe was Mousel on Tombow Coxeve. To be there then who wouldn't wish to sup on 7 sorts of fish.
Tombow Coxeve, sung by retired Mousel fisherman Mike Buttery, or Butts. The story of Tombow Coxeve, the day before Christmas Eve, was that the families of Mousel were facing starvation, as a severe storm prevented the fishing boats from leaving harbour. Local hero Tom saved the day by braving the elements and bringing back food to feast on over the festive season. Storms could wreak ruin on fishing communities. In 1817, a tempest smashed 30 of Polperro's fleet of 45 boats, and 7 years later, just as the village was recovering, the waves took a further 19 craft. The turmoil of international politics has also hit Cornwall's fishing industry. When in 1935 Mussolini invaded Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, the League of Nations banned exports to Italy, the main customer for salacci inglesi, Cornish pilchards. And during the Cold War, Soviet factory ships snaffled up the catch while coming as close to territorial waters as diplomacy would allow. While not so many years ago, tempers flared over fishing rights with our EU cousins, the Spanish.
Was Mousel on Tombow Coxeve, to be there then who wouldn't wish to sup on 7 sorts of fish.
All the same boats used to be there, no railway then, no hotels or anything, straight from the beach right up as far as the sand would go. And they'd moor the seine boats up there. And the men, the seine men with the net, would be down Portminster Beach. And when the man up there shouted "Cowroos," they'd shoot the seine net out. See it here? They'd shoot the seine net out, encircle the fish, and draw the fish in to the beach. And the fish would be so thick you could stand on them.
Does cow
When he gives cowroos, I think that means, shut the net, shut the seine, but they would shout cowroos.
Memories of a rich harvest recalled by Annie Allen of St.Ives. Fascinating recollections of times past have been collated on the Real Cornwall website, which also includes Butt's rendition of Tombow Coxeve. The fishing villages such as St.Ives were once very different, as Annie recalls.
On St.Ives front where the al fresco place is now for the meals outside, well, that was a kipper house. They wouldn't have sat out there when I was going to school. It'd have been smoke black because you couldn't see across the prom. And what they used to do then was clean them and put them upstairs in the top room, and they used to burn oak chips and smoke the kippers with oak chips. You wouldn't have sat down the prom, drunk coffee and tea and pasties then. God, you'd have been smoke black, because there was at least 5 kipper houses in town. And on this slip, on the promenade, they used to wing rays and skate out on the promenade. You wouldn't have sat there in it, because the fish got and everything was all over the quay, all over the prom. Yeah, it was a fishing town.
Despite the decline of the industry, some traditions are still being kept alive, while others are being revived, such as the building of traditional fishing vessels. Andy White, Boats Collection Manager at the National Maritime Museum.
We have a design, or again a rather sort of generic term for a boat called a tosher. And toshers tend to be smaller working boats, usually around about 20-25 feet long. That term was used for anything that plied a trade or did fishing along the Cornish coast.
Some still to be seen in the waters?
There are still a few around, and there are still 1 or 2 that are raced in Falmouth waters as well. As far as traditional working toshers still working, most unlikely. I think the nearest you'll get to a real traditional working boat actually working and sailing, of course, is the oyster dredgers.
You can actually come here and build boats.
You can come here and build boats. You need to really join the college, the Falmouth Marine School, and they're running courses for building new wooden boats from the ground up. So they go from everything from drawing the boat out, lofting it out full size on the floor, cutting the timber, putting all the bits together, putting it in the water and sailing it. They do the whole lot.
They're traditional designs?
They're traditional designs.
Any particular type of wood used?
No, a lot of the boats around here, a lot of the old wooden boats were built from larch, which is basically a pine. And the frames for the boats traditionally would perhaps be oak or elm.
Pilchards are still being exported from Cornish docks, but it's sad to see the Newlyn Pilchard Works has had to move from its old location, which was once Terry Tompkins' place of work. Are these foreign then?
No, these aren't foreign. They're caught here in Mouse Bay, caught here off St. Michael's Mount, they are. So you can't have more Cornish than that, can you? They're salted, they're come off straight off the boat. You see, I showed you that down there. They're put in there dry fish, dry salt. And like I told you, all that gravy there comes out the fish.
So they come in dry off the boat?
Dry off the boat, put in dry fish, dry salt, dry fish in that bin there. And all that liquid you see is what the salt takes out the fish.
And how long does it stay in that?
They got to be in there for a minimum of 4 weeks. A minimum of 4 weeks. They can stop anything longer. They can stop in that anything up to 2 years, as long as they're there 4 weeks.
Then what's the next process?
After 4 weeks, you pack them in these things here, what we call a coffin. Yeah, they're called, you can laugh, my bird, but they're called a coffin. They're coffins, and that's what we call a quarter cask. Anything up to 300 fish in that one. 108 fish in each one of they weigh 8 kilos, that weigh 25 kilos. Now he's pressed like, they're under, well, what can I tell you? They're under the pressure, under the presses for 4 hours. And that squeeze all your salt water and your oil out then. Now that'll keep for a year like that, now see? As he's pressed like that, all dry, that'll keep for a year like that.
Do you throw the oil away?
No, we collect the oil there. We sell that to the old, the fishing tackle shops, like, and put them that way. Okay, yeah. The anglers like it as a bait enhancer, that's what they call them.
Where do the pressed pilchards actually go in the end?
Everything we pack here, all press, all go to Italy, all go to Genoa.
Why not in England? Why don't they use them here?
Well, what can I tell you? I don't like to swear, but they all English are fussy farts. Or you can say squeamish. They tell you they don't like a fish looking like a fish. And these got the guts and everything in them. See, they're guts just as they come out the water, guts, scales, everything. And the English look at that saying, I couldn't eat that one because they don't like the eyes winking at them or something like that. See, they're like I say, they're all fussy farts.
This place, I mean, it's been here a long time.
This place has been here since 1905, this place have. And as you see that customer there, still supplying the same customer. He's been having them from here since 1905, that chap. Okay. So, and been going to Italy like that since 1605 from Cornwall. So
it's been going on for centuries?
Oh, damn, yes, been going on for years, they have, yeah. Yes, so that show how good a nice Cornish pilchard is, doesn't it? Best you can get.
The Falmouth Oyster Festival. It's one of many initiatives to enthuse people about the richness of Britain's seafood. It includes an oyster opening or shucking competition.
We have a winner. 252 seconds. That was completely clean opening of all 20 oysters and 15 bonus points. We have John Ball from the Seafood Bar.
Cornwall's first oyster shelling Supremo. You played a perler. How do you feel?
I feel elated.
A shocking result, so were you surprised?
A shocking result, absolutely. I was absolutely amazed. This is unbelievable.
Warm the cockles of the people back at the restaurant, I would imagine.
Well, hopefully, I mean, obviously, I've been doing this for quite a long time, so...
Any shocking tips I could winkle out of you?
Yeah, do not cut yourself. Be very careful.
And words to the other competitors?
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely fantastic display. Look at all these people here having a fantastic time. You know, celebrating the opening of the Oyster Festival, so it's been brilliant.
Nice to see you're not shellfish in victory.
Thank you very much.
5 kilos of 1 kilo fish at a price on end. 660 there. Yeah. 680, 680, 7, 10, 720.
Newlyn Fish Market. The buyers may be local, but the customers are mainly from abroad. And there's much to be bought, as Paul Trebilcock of the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation explains.
The key species for us are monkfish, megrim soles,
Dover sole, hake, pullock, and then sort of to a lesser extent, cod, haddock, plaice, lemon sole, John Dory's, bass. Up to 30 species are landed on this market in any given day. Newlyn is kind of renowned for the quality of fish landed because of the short trips, because of the quick sort of turnaround from net to plate, if you like. So we don't. No vessel in Newlyn operates more than 8 days trips.
So most of them are perhaps day boats.
Approximately half of our fleet here in Newlyn, or half of our membership of this organisation, pretty much extensively operate on a daily basis. The other half work trips between 3 and 8 days.
Are enough of your customers within the United Kingdom?
I think last year it was something like 80% of the fish landed into Newlyn was for the export market. We've seen in recent years, we've seen a small increase in the domestic market. Some put it down to Rick Stein, others put it down to Ready Steady Cook. But whatever it is, the UK housewife is becoming a little more adventurous, buying the fish like the megrims and the hake. But still, 80% of what's landed here is exported.
Britain needs to change its taste, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably a fair comment. It'd be nice to see Britain broaden its taste buds, or broaden its palate when it comes to fish.
There's a lot of good stuff out there.
Excellent stuff.
Fill up your glasses and let us be merry. For to roam and to plunder it is our intent, as we roam through the valleys.
The weekly fisherman's sing-song at the Kedgworth Local. For an island nation, it's strange we don't appreciate our seafood with as much gusto. But tastes are changing, and with a greater awareness of ecology and sustainable fishing, Cornwall's fisherfolk should be looking forward to a bright and prosperous future.
Thank you.